Okay, you're all good.
Okay, great. So we're live on YouTube now, and we have a quorum. So thank you to everyone for being here. First, roll call for our committee. It looks like at this moment, at 8:02 a.m., we have Mark Curran, Bob Chapman, Stephanie Jones, Antonio Don, Dennis Smith, and then myself. And it looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only people we're missing right now from our committee are Jackie Stark and Wayne Primo.
Correct.
And I think we were expecting, or we weren't not expecting either of them. So perhaps they'll join us in the next few minutes. But anyway, moving on to approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our, I believe it was our March 9th meeting?
I'll move we approve the March 9 meeting minutes.
I'll second.
Great. Okay, moved by Bob, seconded by Mark. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say yes.
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 All opposed, no. Abstaining. So that passes unanimously. And that brings us to public comment. Do we have anyone here for public comment?
Hey, can I just have a point of order? Were you approving the agenda?
Oh, sorry. We were approving the. Sorry, we were approving the minutes from that last meeting.
Okay.
I misspoke. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
Great. Thank
Support.
you, Mark. Thank you, Stephanie. All right. Any discussion? So again, we just approved the minutes from our previous meeting. Now we're moving to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say yes.
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 All those opposed, please say no. All abstaining. So that also passes. And now, do we have anybody for public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I haven't received any emails. Did you, Dennis?
No, nothing.
Okay, thanks. So that moves on, or that brings us to new business. I kind of jumped the gun a little bit there with item 1, approval of our March 9th meeting minutes, so please forgive me. But that already being out of the way, let's move on to item number 2, which is the purpose of our meeting today, having a productive discussion with some of our city department heads about the initial recommendations in our initial report to the city commission and how some of those might potentially be implemented and what other factors and opportunities we should be considering as we prepare our final report. So Dennis, I think I will probably let you more take the lead on this if you don't mind. I think maybe you have an idea, a clear idea of how you might want to structure the meeting, since you're the one that
Sure.
did the legwork to get everybody here. And perhaps maybe first it would make sense to just have everyone here introduce themselves.
Sure, that sounds good. So I think most folks on the committee know that I'm a department head with the city. I've been your administrative liaison, but I'm the community development director. And then I will hand it off to the other folks. We'll go around the screen. So on my screen, Gary, you're next.
Hi, everybody. I'm Gary Simpson, the counter of the beans for the city.
Next, we go to Captain Lorela.
Good morning, everyone. Captain Mike Lorela with the City of Marquette Police Department.
And next, going down, we will go to Chief Davis.
So Chief Davis, I think we're having some trouble hearing you there.
You're muted, I think.
It doesn't look like his Zoom account is muted. I don't know what's going on there.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll fill in for him now. That's Ian Davis. He's the fire chief for the city of Marquette. Next, we'll go on to Mick.
Mick Kilpala, city engineer with the city of Marquette. I realize my camera's not on.
All right, and then we'll move on to Eric.
Good morning, Eric Steeman, Director of Facilities and Maintenance. And I'm having video issues with my camera as well, so I'm gonna have to join via phone here.
All right, and Scott.
Scott Benzie, Director of Public Works.
All right, and soon to be joining us will be Dave Stensis, who's chimed in on meetings before, and he is our city planner. So we have circulated the report amongst the department heads and the administrative staff, and we appreciate the ability to be able to do that because we are typically the folks that have to implement the policy directives that are established by the city commission. And in doing, the implementation of those policy directives, there are perhaps some nuances or either opportunities or challenges associated with any of those policies that may come through. And it's usually, a good idea to try and iron those out ahead of time. So what we had done is we had circulated the report through the committee. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that report up and then do a screen share on it. And we'll kind of walk through it with the department heads. Let's see. Should be working for everybody.
Yes.
All right, here we go. So particularly instances of this report that brought some continued discussion for city department heads, and we'll actually get to the implementation phase of it. Okay, defining the city role, and I'm going to kind of pinpoint where what departments in particular would have something to do with this. So defining the role in affordable housing missing middle, stake and development process when you talk about providing special financing, land, or other incentives, that's typically my department and the finance director. Reviewing and updating the city policies and codes. A lot of that falls through the city planner and my office. We had done a number of those things already. The big one that stands out where it would be a kind of an all-in effort is the winter parking ban reevaluation. There's a lot of moving parts to that with public works, police, fire. There's a lot of coordination that would be needed on that one as well. And I think that's one that sparked a lot of conversation amongst the staff. And then seeking partnerships, the County Land Bank, Brownfield Redevelopment Finance Authority, those kind of really fall in my lap of community development. Board of Light and Power discussion is really one for the city manager and city commission with the BLP. And most of the MEDC stuff comes through my office now. The Marquette Housing Commission would be seen more as a one-to-one relationship between the city commission and the housing commission. And anytime we get into public-private partnerships of some form, we're really going to look at finance playing a major role in that. So we don't get ourselves in a situation. We want to make sure we can be able to afford things. So I'm going to stop the screen share now. And I think a good place to start would perhaps be get some input on any opportunities and challenges regarding that on-street parking. And I really wouldn't like to look at it per se right now as how do we change it, but let's have the folks talk right now, particularly about why the current situation works for them. And after we get through that, then we'll talk about the challenges a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Captain Laura to, and also Chief Davis to talk about that a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I can start for a little bit here until my voice gives out, I think. Some of the things that really work about the nighttime parking ban is that is our opportunity to safely plow snow back to the curb line. And additionally, it's our opportunity when we are removing snow to safely remove snow banks when we don't have parked cars to deal with. As it sits now, I mean, it's a great deal of coordination, even with the parking ban, because we're coordinating with the solid waste collection. We're coordinating with different areas of town that, especially when you get around the downtown and that have bars and businesses that are open late at night and that type of stuff. So in my opinion, it's kind of imperative that we have that time. I don't know if you want more of an overview than that, Dennis, or you want me to talk about some of the issues I foresee if we do away with it.
Let's chime in from public, the police and fire on the positive aspects of the way we do it now.
Would you like me to start, Dennis? Okay, thank you. I'll just kind of segue off of what Scott had said. I've been here 25 years, and long before that, the winter parking ban has been in place. And personally, I think it's the most effective and efficient way to maintain the streets in the city. You look at, there's been some talk about other areas doing the one-sided parking. That may work in other areas, but if you look at the city of Marquette, this area as a whole, we're the third snowiest location in the country. I think what Scott had said, given that amount of snow we typically get, thankfully we didn't this year, but typically we get, I think it closes our streets in enough, and eliminating or altering the winter parking ban would have some huge impact on, I believe, the plowing effectively the snow. I also think putting one-sided parking or making any changes could affect operations with large emergency vehicles such as a fire truck, and I'll let Ian touch on that. I don't think we're like other cities. I think we get a lot of snow, and I think it's effective the way it is. I too am in favor of keeping it as is. Now, I spoke with Becky from the DDA, who unfortunately is not on this meeting, but I did speak with her, and she's in favor of leaving the winter parking ban as is as well. Reason being because that would have a huge impact on the operations of the downtown area. Becky also indicated that not only would it have a huge impact on the snowplow operations downtown, but it'd have a huge impact on the revenue of the downtown area as well. There's upwards of 100 or so permits that are given overnight, and that could obviously impact that revenue for the Downtown Development Authority. So that, I just think, given kind of segueing off of what Scott said and my thoughts, I am in favor of leaving it exactly as is. Thank you. Hi, Stephanie.
Just a quick question, and I may be wrong, but I didn't think anyone on the committee was gung-ho that this is the only solution we have, and I really appreciate hearing from you. I just wonder what solutions you could see to alleviate that problem we have with places not having enough places to park.
I think that's a very good question. Marquette has grown significantly. We've become a destination, and that is a huge problem. I mean, with the VRBOs, with the limited parking, I hear that often from people who own rental facilities. Where can I park? Or, I only have, my driveway is only adequate for two people to park in. However, we have 4 people staying here, and so on and so forth. I don't know the answer to that. I don't. My response to them is, that's something that I can't, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that.
Do you know what the percentage of green space is required for a duplex or multifamily?
I do not.
Okay.
I imagine maybe Dennis can answer that question. I do know that we do have significant green space requirements in a lot of our residential zoning districts.
Yeah, those were in the latest round of the LDC. The front area stuff was eliminated, really, where you come into having a lot of open space requirements. That's in the rear yard area. Really, I think, for years and years, this problem was done by front yard parking, and then that became a challenge. And once the front yard parking ban was put into place, that's really where a lot of the challenges came from. And we still do permit winter front yard parking on a case-by-case basis because there's a lot of topography in town where you can't get to a backyard. And the front yard is the only option. And those are kind of reviewed on a case-by-case basis. But, it's really something that front yard parking means a lot to this community, obviously, or we wouldn't have gone ahead and gone through the motions and of discussing the pros and cons and eliminating the front yard parking, because it does drastically alter what a street looks like in terms of physical form and the character of a neighborhood when you have something like that. But being fairly honest about it, it wasn't until front yard parking was eliminated that a lot of these really challenges came about.
If I could just jump in there, I think that's a helpful perspective, Dennis, that, we do have the front yard, front yard parking is prohibited in the city of Marquette, except although, as you noted, we do allow it on a case-by-case basis if, backyard or, the side yard is not an option. That's possible. But I think it's important to keep in mind, I guess that, we've gotten some really helpful feedback, from our department heads here about the winter parking ban and how that is important to the way that we operate and we're clearing snow and the way perhaps emergency vehicles are operating. It'd be interesting to hear from our fire chief about that. But I think that's why we wanted to have this discussion, is because the initial report was really sort of just a polished draft, and we wanted to make sure that we're getting feedback, constructive feedback, not only on that one very specific recommendation, but others as well. So I really appreciate that.
Commissioner Bonzel, if I may,
yeah,
I just wanted to expand on Stephanie's question as well.
Sure.
Dennis had brought up the point as far as front yard parking, and that is done through the community development. Express permission is given. The police department deals with the right-of-way parking, where express permission is given through my office, and we do give out those permits, if you will, throughout the year, where if people don't have adequate parking, we do allow, under certain circumstances, people to park in the right-of-way. And Chief Davis walked into my office here. I'm gonna switch speakers here, and so he can be on this too. So thank you.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Hey guys, also remember with this on-street parking idea, we didn't intend it to be citywide. We thought it could be like street by street or almost block by block for areas that would fit. I mean, everybody knows, little sections of Prospect Street and little sections of Arch Street, it's never going to work. We would have to be very subjective, and that would be your call on if we can pull this off. But there are some areas on the east side that are wide enough that need that extra parking. And the intent was to try to not have as much front yard parking rather than going backwards and allowing all the front yard parking again. So just feedback. It's not kind of citywide. It's block by block, street by street.
And just to clarify, I know in short-term rentals, you have to have a parking plan. When you have a long-term rental parking permit, do you still have to, and I should know this because I
Yes.
have one, so, okay.
Yep, that's part of the application. Hey, Chief Davis, did you have anything to add to the discussion about the current operations for winter parking ban and your vehicles?
It really doesn't affect us. When we're doing any emergency response, we're dealing with traffic, we're dealing with parking any time of the year. I don't know that a change in how the rental parking is done during the winter months is really going to affect our operations emergency wise. And then on the rental side of it, where we handle the inspections and the registration, we're really just looking at the safety of the building and the life safety of the tenants. So it honestly doesn't affect our department very much.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Now, let's talk about, now that we got how much we like the current way and what it works and things like that. The question was posed by the committee related to, are there particular areas that could be test spots for this per se, or something along those lines? And I'd be interested, this is something that I haven't really discussed internally, so I'd be interested more than anything from Scott on his operation, on how we would be able to, accomplish something like that. Because I know he's got I believe the way his crews work, or it's one crew per shift or things like that. So tell me, if you could, Scott, a little bit of what your operation would need to do something like that.
Well, if you're simply talking about a block or two at a time, those probably wouldn't be part of the regular rotation. They would simply be plowed to keep it open. But the fear after you do that for a while is, cars pack down the snow where they're parking.
Yep.
And pretty soon you have a ice shelf that's coming out from both sides of the road. And once that ice shelf is there, you're probably in for a very bumpy ride for the road till you get a good thaw. So that's one issue. Obviously, as those ice shelves creep further out into the road, the travel lane and even the parking area, the overall road width itself decreases in width.
So it narrows.
And then when you do get to the thaw and you've got those big ice shelves in areas where they're way out in the road, generally we end up trying to get in there and remove it, because all of our drainage collection is at the curb line. And if you can't get the runoff back to the curb line, then you're going to have flooding issues on top of that.
Flooded streets. Okay. And that's kind of an important thing, because Mick, can you explain what freeze thaw and ice and water like that does to the life expectancy of a street?
Yeah, I guess if you have water that's pooling on a street and there's the asphalt is cracked, that'll drastically reduce the life of a street, because the structure under the street becomes saturated, and the strength of the soil decreases drastically during those time periods.
So that's worthy of mentioning. One of the things that sticks in my head now that Dave is on the call here, I believe there are provisions in the code that would allow parking on a lot other than the one that would be needed, as long as it's located on the same block. And I think the thought behind that was there could be some type of cooperative agreement or whatnot, a purchase of a lot in the middle of the block, tear down the house and put in a parking lot type thing. Dave, can you explain that a little bit while I'm thinking out loud?
Yeah, good morning. That is allowed in a lot of our zoning districts now. There's provision in some of them to have parking within 2,000 feet of the lot, as long as there's an agreement with that can be provided to state that there's parking, a parking agreement with somebody else somewhere else, and within the jurisdiction or an adjacent jurisdiction. We haven't had a lot of people take advantage of that, but some do. And we're trying to do more of the shared parking, encourage more shared parking between residential, commercial, different commercial property owners. I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah, that's helpful. It's just, forgive me for thinking out loud, but I saw Dave's name and I was, we're looking at potential solutions, and I know that that's one that's pretty much offered. So, going back to the on-street stuff, this is kind of for my own personal benefit because I don't know how that works. But Captain Lorela, can you tell me, if you have somebody in violation of that, do we ticket or do we tow?
So as you know, the winter parking ban begins November 1st and ends April 1st. This last month, we have not been ticketing because of the lack of snow. The streets have been bare. We typically don't advertise that, just in case, as we all know, we could get a 3-foot snowstorm tomorrow. So, but we've instructed our officers not to ticket, and it's been about 3 weeks or so. To answer your question, we do ticket. At the start, we put out several public service announcements. We get on Q107, we get on TV6, we get on social media, and so on and so forth. Our first and foremost goal is to educate the public, right? And then at the start of the season, November 1st, we give what's called like a grace period. We start issuing warning tickets, and it clearly states on the ticket, this is a warning, you are in violation of the winter parking ban. Again, to educate the public, to try to get them into that mindset. And then once the first major snowfall starts or happens, that's when the directive is given to start issuing winter parking ban tickets. And we're pretty consistent with that from that point going forward until we lose the snow, like I said earlier now. Now, the second part of your question, Dennis, as far as towing, we will tow under circumstances where we just get, a major snowstorm and it's really hampering the removal of the snow by the Department of Public Works. We will tow in that occasion, or instance rather. And then we will also tow 3 or more tickets. We call it a boot. We'll either put a boot on the car, or we will tow in that regard as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much for that. So,
you're welcome.
Yes, Steph.
Do they have areas that are consistently problem areas with cars constantly being ticketed? That would be areas that we should look at?
So that's a good question, Stephanie. I will tell you that when we start the winter parking ban November 1st, we will issue those, as I mentioned, those warning tickets, and we see a lot of vehicles. And there's really no specific area, but we do see a lot of vehicles. In that warning period, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever the case may be, typically it's 2 weeks, that warning period, really helps educate the public. And it really reduces the number of vehicles that are left on the street after that time period. Now, I will tell you, I void winter parking tickets. And some of those reasons are emergencies. Case I can think of is we have people who work for hospice who will show up at a residence and leave their vehicle on the street to go in and care for a person. Well, yes, of course I'm going to void that ticket. And then we have a lot of our problems with winter parking, believe it or not, are kids who call and, they had a little bit too much to drink and they thought it was the right thing to do to leave their vehicle on the road. And they got a winter parking ban ticket and they're asking to get it voided. And I said, well, you absolutely made the right choice not driving. But they pay the ticket.
Great. Yeah, I would just I think I would just like to make 2 quick points, which is number one, thank you all again for that feedback, because it's incredibly valuable to all of us on the committee as we're preparing our final report. Clearly the winter parking ban is very important for the way that several different city departments operate. DPW, MPD, right, the DDA. And so that's really important for us to know as we're deciding what we want to include in our final report, or maybe don't want to include. The second point I wanted to make is that I do think I do think that point that you made there, Captain Laurel, is really interesting in response to Stephanie's question about, is there any particular area where it just seems like, oh, there's a whole lot of these violations happening in winter parking ban. It doesn't seem that there's a particular pattern of, oh, this neighborhood's always violating the winter parking ban at a higher rate than other ones. Because if that was the case, it would suggest that maybe certain development patterns or certain types of housing are going to cause a whole bunch of problems with regards to winter parking ban violations and things like that. But that doesn't seem to be the case. And I think that, I guess the last point I would make on this topic, and I think maybe we can move on past the parking topic, unless committee members have any final questions. But the last point I would make is just that, I think that when we were discussing the winter parking ban as a committee, I think we recognized, first of all, that we needed to have this conversation at some point. And then secondly, that it's not a prerequisite for doing any of the other things that we're talking about doing in our initial report. Our recommendations none of them are, dependent on making any changes to the winter parking ban. It would perhaps make some things easier, but it's not a requirement. And so I do think that's important to keep in mind as well as we move forward. Just that's, I guess, more for our committee, the benefit of our committee, that, this is really helpful feedback and we should be taking it into consideration and listening to you guys. Because, at the end of the day, you're the experts.
I want to throw one more thing out there. Dennis, like on the east side, would it be possible, or maybe this is a suggestion we need to make, is should we look at potentially either the city building small parking lots and renting out sites, or private individuals who have extra land legally being able to rent out sites or building parking lots? I know nobody wants a parking lot next to their house, but it's a needed aspect.
Well, the provisions are in the code for that to occur. And, my answer is going to be, I'd like to let the private sector figure it out. Right.
Yep.
And really, that's kind of why I have the finance director here, because I don't want Gary having a grabber on us when we, if we have some kind of recommendation that's going to end up in a legacy cost for the city of Marquette without much of a return on the investment. So, I mean, that's not to say an absolute no that, the city wouldn't do something like that. I'm quite sure that anything's on the table, but again, I always try to facilitate things through our department to make sure that people can do things to come up with solutions. in the spirit of the, the private sector taking that on. Now, that doesn't mean, the city can't do that. That would have to be a definite higher level policy discussion.
Thanks, Dennis.
Okay.
And thanks for that question, Mark. Does anybody else have any other questions, Dennis?
Yeah, just following up on Mark's question. I know that the city over the years has looked at things like parking structures and things like that, and allegedly, groups have looked together to see if they can do that. When the city looks at that kind of stuff, are they looking at just for commercial, like say up by the library? Are they looking at like overnight or permanent, semi-permanent leases of a year? So I know that there's some off that one alley behind Steinhaus that you can get permits for like 6 months or a year at a time. And I'm wondering, when they do those parking analysis, are they looking at something? So it would be something like what Mark was just talking about, or Steph was talking about, where the city might build a tenant type parking structure. Obviously, then you get into the whole thing like with Gary and the long-term legacy things, but that they would actually rent that out for residential folks in the neighborhood to do overnight parking, much like you would if you were in a bigger city or something.
Well, to answer the first part of the question, I would have to get back to you. The DDA is purely responsible for doing the studies on the parking structure, and they have their formula for how they rent and what income they have on it, and things along those lines. That's purely done by the DDA. And the second part of the question is another one that I think that goes back to that higher level discussion, that you'd have to definitely do a cost benefit analysis on that. I'd like to.
Does everybody remember when Pine Ridge wanted to build a parking structure? That would have been the perfect application of building what they need and then do extra parking, and they could have generated a lot of revenue by renting to neighbors around there.
Yeah, I being the planner at the time, I do remember when Pine Ridge wanted to put a parking structure in that neighborhood, and it was not well received. So you have that aspect of it as well, right? I'd like to, for the sake of time, if I may, Mr. Chairman, kind of shift gears from the parking, and because we're kind of drifting into policy as well here. Speak a little bit about policy thoughts, and this would be for, I think, more of the committee, since you have the finance director here and myself and Sean, who liaison to the Brownfield. We've had discussions about potential partnerships, and one of the potential partnerships that I had been exploring was with a private company that has interest in purchasing some land from the city, and the mechanism that they would use to have city stake in the game, right, would be to utilize a brownfield. Now, they utilize the brownfield via the county land bank, because if the property is owned by the county land bank, then what can happen is you can now do a brownfield plan that can make up for the gaps in financing, which means you could use the TIF, which is tax increment financing. It's all the taxes that are captured on that development itself, stay with that development, and they can provide down payment assistance and gap financing and things along those lines. That's one potential way for municipalities to have stake in the game. A simple way is just to sell property. If we were land barons and we had a lot of good property, but we don't unfortunately have much of that left, that's where the conversation with the Board of Light and Power comes in, because they have a lot of the large holdings. left in the city. But when we mention policy, those are a couple ideas that come to mind, and I'd kind of open it up for everyone here, in particular the committee members that may have some ideas, to kind of bounce it back and forth, so we can have a better idea and a little bit of discussion about that.
What stands in the way of developers utilizing TIF dollars?
So the way that mechanism would have to work, well, first you'd have to pledge a certain amount of affordable or missing middle type income units. It has to hit a certain threshold to be eligible for a lot of the programs that would be needed to make that work. Given in particular what we've heard from Mark and other developers, with the high cost of materials, you're going to need something to close the gap in terms of whatever MISTA has available for certain programs. But in order to do that, you need to have some land. The person that would own the land would need to give it to the land bank, sell it to the land bank, whatnot, and then have a brownfield authority work up a brownfield plan and work out, the details through a pro forma, get that approved by the local municipality, and then get to work on building those houses and use the tax base created off that. Now, in particular, that's been kind of an interest, and maybe Gary, you can chime in, because I know, speaking for Gary, and one of the fears is, are we going to get into something that's going to, come out of the general fund or whatnot? And whenever you look at a brownfield or some type of development that is kind of self-supporting, it's really an issue of, well, we're not getting any income on it for X number of years, but we will, and we're also not really taking away from anything if it's vacant. So you want to kind of share your general thoughts, Gary, on how you would prefer to manage finances, not spend money, spend money, etc.?
Yeah, so now we're on to everybody's favorite topic. So thank you. Really, the way Dennis described it, and it was run by me some time ago, Mac had kind of floated the idea, Mac McClellan with the Brownfield Authority. And to me, it just sounded like something somebody who works for government would come up with. It's like, let's just make it as convoluted and complicated as possible. And that's fine, because sometimes that's how you have to do it to make it work with the rules that we have. But the cautionary tale is the devil is in the details. So, we can talk about it in broad concepts and stuff and agree to it, but really, once we get into the nitty-gritty details, that's where we're going to have to start being really careful about how to proceed. And because other municipalities are doing it, it's a little bit more, I guess, pleasing to me to hear that, because I'm a big believer in copy and paste. But also keep in mind, as many of you probably already know, the state likes to change the rules. Once something they find is working good, they like to change the rules to make it a little more difficult. So if we do get into copy and paste mode, we still just need to be careful that the state still allows those kind of things. And really what a point I was wanting to make is, if this is a road that the city is going to go down, the preference would be to use already publicly owned property, because the tax base is zero. So the city isn't going to miss, when the brownfield starts collecting the TIF, we aren't going to miss any tax money. Now the problem, like I know it was mentioned, the old hospital, that might be a good site, which maybe it's a good site, but from the chair that I sit in, that would not be preferable, because that's already a taxable property. And the city's we're trying to increase our taxable value because we took a really big hit when We Energies closed. And we've also taken some hits through a state tax tribunal. So we're really trying to claw our way out of that. So, you know, just as I'm saying, where I sit, it would be preferable to not use property that is currently taxable, but it's more acceptable to use some publicly owned property because we aren't collecting taxes on
So
that.
Gary, can you just give like a ballpark percentage of breakdown of taxable income for the city, not in a dollar amount, but percentage by residential versus commercial versus industrial?
I do have that.
So I think that's important to note. And I also want to make sure I'm not lying when I tell folks that a majority of our income is directly from residential property tax collection.
I do have a report on that.
And I apologize. This is kind of billish of me to just drop that bomb on you without telling you ahead of time.
I think, you know,
Oh, that's okay.
while Gary's finding his report there, I guess like Dennis or Gary or Sean, if you want to, just to clarify just for everybody, because I think, you know, most of us understand, but at least for the benefit of maybe anybody from the public who might be watching this now or in the future, like this would not, this way of financing some more affordable or missing middle housing through Brownfield TIF would not necessarily require us to use any general fund dollars, correct? Like it would avoid
correct.
that whole issue. It wouldn't be a matter of the city, you know, directly subsidizing housing, correct?
That, you know, that honestly is why it is, you know, at a staff level in my discussions with the city manager and Gary and the Brownfield, we've kind of preferred that method that as it was presented to us, because you're not usurping or using general fund money to do that. Now, there, of course, depending on how you structure something like that, when you use public property, you know, setting up the financing structure, you know, there may be a point where the city would have to front some money for some upfront costs, or the city may get involved in a portion of the guarantee up front, but that's all recoverable and paid off through the Brownfield. So, and this is just one of the mechanisms. I mean, another mechanism that we've heard from people is we got Habitat for Humanity that would like to buy some city property and build some houses on it. So, you know, that's another option as well. But the only reservation that I would have with something like that is purely based upon density, not housing quality or anything along those lines. But I think that the density of the product becomes really important.
I just want to throw out there in terms of brownfield funding, you're only capturing the value increased by the development. So, you know, any money that you're taking out of the city tax rolls or anything is directly attributable to the money that was generated because this project came to be. So it's new money, not existing money, basically.
That's right.
Yeah, kind of my point was.
One thing I want to throw out there, it's not always just the financing. A lot of it, I mean, you can go through right now and you can get loans for near 2% locked for 35 years. And you may only have to put down 10% or less on new construction. The problem is the rental rates in Marquette don't justify that new construction. So the financing is out there. I mean, you can do a 223 D4, and there's tons of money out there for it. The problem is they just still don't cash flow to the federal regulations. I mean, it shows that our rents are kind of low. I know a lot of people say they're high, but.
Well, I think we may have seen that in the comparable communities data last time, that, you know, our stuff seemed to be kind of on the lower end of some of those comparables. But, you know, I find it interesting that it is, you know, so this is let's put this one in perspective while Gary looks for that, right? Just as I live down in Forsyth Township out in the woods, right? But they're doing a new kind of apartment thing the Nyquists are doing, and it's kind of for older folks, kind of a little retirement, but they're very, very small units, and they're renting them for, I think, close to $1,700 a month. So, I mean, and that's Forsyth Township, right? So that give you an idea, and that's being done. It's not completed yet, but it's being done using the pandemic construction costs. So, hey, Gary, are you ready?
Yep, ready. So the breakdown of the taxable value, and this was for the 2020 year, but roughly 43.5% of the tax base is commercial industrial, 55.5% is residential, and 1% is utility. So that's kind of the breakdown there. I think that's what was being asked.
Gary, how much is taxable versus non-taxable in land? If you know.
We don't have a firm figure on taxable versus non-taxable, but we do have a significant portion that is non-taxable. I've heard estimates as high as 50%. So somewhere between 40 and 50% of the city's total land is non.
Yeah, I can answer that. At one point in time, I did an analysis in 2003, 2004. At that time, we were at like 57%. It has decreased. It's still a little bit over 50%. And that's based upon land mass in terms of acres, not directly into number of properties.
Great. I was just curious, before we were to move on to any other topics, I'd encourage any committee members who have any questions or comments about this brownfield TIF concept. If you have anything, please speak up. I'm sure, that Dennis and Gary and Sean would be happy to answer any questions you got.
I just want to point out too, and it's probably not an issue, but in the state constitution, excuse me, it says the city can't act as a bank. Now, I'm sure that's left open to a lot of legal interpretation, but when it comes to the city's involvement, and I think that's why it was thrown out to use the brownfield to try to get around a lot of that. But if we're talking about the general fund making direct subsidies, and again, like I said earlier, the devil is in the details. So we just have to be very careful how that is structured. I just want to make a couple other comments that Dennis had kind of mentioned something too, and the new buzzword now in the governmental finance field is public-private partnerships. Those are starting to get a lot of support, particularly at the federal level. I'm not sure what all that entails, but I just know if we start using that buzzword, that might be a good thing and might get us some money. Now, in previous municipalities I've worked at, and I don't know what the current rules are, but they used to be able to use CBDG grants, community development block grants, for similar type things. I don't know if that's something that wants to be explored or not.
Yeah, we did look into those, and it's just like anything else with the CDGB program. We have too high of a median income to qualify for a lot of their programs.
My only other comment I really wanted to make is just, and it seems like you have a good handle on it from what I'm hearing, what I read in the report, but please just take a long-term view. Like Dennis mentioned, legacy costs. And by long-term, I mean, please look 30 years and beyond, even though most of us won't be doing what we're doing in 30 years, but case in point, I still look at agreements the city did like 50 years ago, and I'm like, you know, what the heck were they thinking at that time? Because it's really putting a burden on us now in stuff that was done 50 years ago. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person that they're, you know, doing bad things to my grave because of agreements that we came up with while I was here. So just please take a very long-term view as to how this is going to work out. And
Gary, what are a couple of those ideas that they did in the past?
oh, just lots of things. I don't have any specific examples offhand, but there's quite a few things that, and I can come back with you later, but there's just quite a few things that the city did that is kind of a head scratcher. And so and I'm sure at the time everybody thought it was a good idea. I don't think anybody had the intent of, oh, let's mess the city up long term, but
I could probably
Gary, was that because things had changed regulatory wise since those decisions were made, or just?
And that's part of it. That's why I said we need to be careful if you do go copy and paste, because things that were done, maybe a municipality did something 20 years ago that everybody thought was great. And now the state is, because, well, as many of you probably know too, the state is really kind of changing how they're doing brownfields now, which is changing some of the projects I know the Brownfield was looking at possibly doing. So, you know, and you can't anticipate those things, but, you know, as much as possible, just try to take a long-term view, and let's try not to be the ones where whoever's sitting in our chairs 30 years from now is saying, why did the heck did they do that?
I would like to, if I could, then I would say those were probably like the two major topics of discussion for the department head. So I'd like to kind of relinquish back to the chairman, and we have our administrative team here. You guys can just bounce whatever questions you have off of us. Try to keep it housing related though, please.
Thank you, Dennis. Yeah, and thank you for kind of leading the way there through the parking and then the Brownfield TIF discussion. I think those are both, we got some really helpful feedback and information as a committee from both those discussions. I had one quick question, and then I'd be happy to turn it over to other committee members for our last half hour or however long people have questions here, if it's less than that. But my one question was, and I do wish that we had our DDA director here, but Dennis or Sean or Gary, maybe you can provide some input on this. In our report, one of the recommendations is related to the MEDC and how the DDA has been successful in obtaining grants for upper story housing renovation in the downtown district over the years. And then I also know that we're currently in the process of trying to become a redevelopment ready community, which according to my understanding would also open up some new potential possibilities and opportunities in terms of grants and support from the state, which could maybe be directed towards more affordable or missing middle housing development in the downtown district. I'm curious, you know, if anybody has any information on that from our administrative team here.
Sure, I would. So over the years, they've been very successful with the second story grants for apartments. You remember the Luke Apartments? That was one of the first ones. And I believe there's like 6 units up there. And there are a couple over what is now Diggs. I mean, there's several throughout the entire downtown that they were very successful with that program. The MEDC now is really investing heavily in downtowns. As a matter of fact, to qualify for just about any of the funding through the MEDC, it has to be a traditional downtown. And that sets us above and beyond most communities when it comes to that, because we have a wonderful downtown that's well managed. So certainly there are more opportunities available there. And can you repeat the second question? Because I was kind of focused on the first one.
Oh, no worries. I was just curious, how redevelopment ready communities process
Sure.
relates
All right.
to
So
that.
the RRC, that the good news is we're like one report away from getting our certification. So we hope to have that by June for sure. Once we become redevelopment ready certified, that kind of opens us up to a second tier of available opportunities. Now, there's not necessarily direct funding involved, but it does open us up to getting some much needed technical assistance through managing some of those processes with the folks that do this for a living at the state level and things like that. So, it basically opens us up to some free hand-holding that we could really use to help us navigate through some of these waters. And it will, the state's been kind of quiet about it, but I know through several channels that are very, very trustworthy that there's going to come a point in time here in the near future that if you are not RRC certified, you are not going to be able to tap into certain funds.
Thanks, Dennis. That's helpful. And I think that maybe we'll hopefully include more details about the RRC process and opportunities with the MEDC in our final report. There's some pretty exciting stuff as I was doing some research that we could potentially access. But that's all I had. So do any of our other committee members have questions for any of our administrative team members that are here with us?
I have a suggestion and an ask. As you guys go through and you look at your forms and your applications, there appears to be a lot of duplication, and I don't know how we can just continually to streamline it. Like, you might have different zoning forms and you wind up having to put all the same name and information and property numbers all in one. And you put that on 10 different forms and it just becomes monotonous. And I don't know how close we can get to be doing even more of our forms electronically. And just as you guys go through, ask yourselves, is this information really needed? Because some of it just feels like it was probably needed way back when, but now with all of our access to the online data, it's not needed. So when you guys are looking at revamping forms, just ask yourself, do we really need this?
Yeah, that's duly noted, and that's a good point. And a little bit of history, just so you understand why the way it is, like everything falls back to the 10 percenters, right? Well, you used to have the coordination between departments to where there was a lot of information on that zoning application because it would need to be shared with the property assessing department because if somebody was adding something to a building, they wouldn't necessarily share that with the assessing department in the hopes that they wouldn't come through and do the inspection or get an increase in their taxes on it. So a lot of that redundancy is kind of a legacy type of thing. And as we continue to work through those and get digital and actually have more folks in the taxation department, we'll try to eliminate some of that stuff. And I think that's, you brought up a really good point in that, some of the applications could perhaps just have a cover sheet with sub applications or something along those lines. So that's a really good point, and I appreciate that.
Stephanie, I think you were trying to say something, but you're muted, unfortunately.
I know there are people that would love to put me on permanent mute. So is there anything that the department heads would like us to consider as a committee as we move forward?
I just want to toss one thing out there. We've talked about Brownfield funding a little bit, and we've talked about other sources like the RRC program. And it's really kind of like, one door closing and a window opening with it, because the state has been indicating to us that they want to clamp down on brownfield funding for non-environmental reasons. We're kind of going through a push right now with a recent project. I think Dennis hopped off, but there's the UP State Bank, and the MEDC has chosen to deny our non-environmental expenses on that, which is city infrastructure, because of a shift in their policy. We're advocating, for ourselves and trying to get them to lighten up on it, but brownfield funding is an avenue that might not be totally available, going forward in the future. And that's the state tax capture part of it, for non-environmental stuff. So we could do local capture and we can do environmental work, but brownfield funding is becoming less of an option for, I think, projects like this if you're looking for state tax capture.
So I have something to add that I would like the committee to kind of think about. And I know you've been tasked to look at this from a city perspective, but I would be of the opinion that this is a pretty regional problem. And it's a pretty regional challenge. And quite often we kind of try to solve these on our own islands, particularly, the city being on the island. And I would, when you talk about in the report about seeking partnerships or whatnot, I think it would be good that this is another example of it. Probably wouldn't hurt to talk to the surrounding municipalities and perhaps even Marquette County to bring them in as part of the solution. And I know I've been invited, and I think Chairman Bonsal's been invited to the partnership now with their new director, is kind of attacking housing at a county level, and they're going to be putting something together to just have a discussion about it. But I think it's really important that we kind of include, it's very important to include the surrounding municipalities in the county when we move forward with this, as just a cautionary tale, so you don't end up carrying all that weight on your back as a community.
Great. Do we have any other questions? If not, I guess, the only other thing I would note is that, a couple of our other recommendations do relate to other entities, talking with other, public entities like the Marquette BLP, who own public property in the city of Marquette, talking with the DDA. We of course have representation on our committee from the Marquette Housing Commission. And so I think those partnerships will be really important, even if those, department or, agency directors weren't able to be with us today. Just acknowledging that there are other stakeholders here who are going to be really important to housing moving forward, who will also need to continue to engage. And when I say we, I guess I mean the city, not just specifically our committee, which at the end of the day, right, is not going to exist in a few months. So will be sunsetting on June 30th.
So you're not gonna push for reauthorization?
Well, I think that our initial mission as a committee was to get together for a year and a half and then produce a final set of recommendations to the city commission. At the end of the day, I suppose it would be up to the city commission to decide that. I actually like what you were saying, Dennis, of, I think by the time we get our final report done in June, we're going to have a really solid report with a lot of really good information that's specific to the city and a lot of really great recommendations that are specific to the city, which could realistically take years to implement.
Right.
But shifting to a regional focus could be potentially one of our recommendations when we're talking about partnerships. And maybe that would be the next step, is instead of reauthorizing a city-only committee, to try and work with other municipalities and perhaps the county. I know that the county, as a county planner, I know that the county master plan is going to include a lot of content about housing and housing affordability. So perhaps that's a next step, is to move to that regional level discussion. But that's just my personal thought.
So that's a good point. I think there's a lot of things upcoming. You know, there's a lot of regional things that need to be looked at, and they all tie back to housing, right? When we talk about, previously I had mentioned the regional tourism planning, right? Well, that directly affects the price of housing, especially if you have a lot of vacation homes and things along those lines. So, you know, we'll be addressing that stuff at a higher level.
Dennis, I really want to thank you for the statistic. I found it fascinating that so few of the STRs were homestay. And as we've mentioned as a committee, that might be a place that we could loosen up that regulation, because it doesn't take a domicile out of any other use when it's a homestay. And it could allow someone to potentially stay in their home or get into a home. But I was surprised that number was so low. So thank you for providing it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks to Chief Davis for that. And really, it's very interesting to me when I looked at it. It kind of caught me off guard as well, that so few of them are homestays. And I think this commission, or this committee, has discussed the fact that, you know, a homestay is a very legitimate opportunity for someone to purchase a house and be able to afford to live in it.
Absolutely. You know, I actually had one last quick question that I thought of, and any committee members, if you have any, you know, please feel free to ask right after this. But I just had a quick question for, I guess, Dennis and maybe and Gary probably. So, you know, we briefly mentioned the idea of, well, what if you had like a nonprofit developer that came forward, like Habitat for Humanity would maybe be the most obvious example, who they wanted to acquire some city land. Maybe the city has a few lots where Habitat could build some houses. But our city charter currently only allows a city to sell or transfer property to anyone
Correct.
for 80% or greater of the actual assessed or appraised value. So I guess I'm curious what your thoughts would be, and this is just an idea that I've been thinking about for the last couple of weeks. What would your thoughts be on potentially, you know, allowing some kind of exception for that in specific cases, like a nonprofit that wants to do like affordable housing development, like Habitat for Humanity, and how would that process work if that were to be implemented?
I think probably I can answer a portion of that and Gary can help. But the first thing that comes to mind is in disposition of anything owned by a municipality, whether it's a 25-year-old pickup truck or a piece of land, it has to be, you have to receive the value for it. You can't donate it per se. So that inherently becomes the real challenge for it. I remember down when I was quasi-manager down in Chocolate Township, we had these old computers that we needed to get rid of, and we wanted to donate them to it's like a school and a church or something like that. And we weren't permitted to do it. We had to sell them for the value that they were at. So I don't know, Gary, maybe you can help me out a little bit with that. I mean, on its face, I don't identify much of a problem with that. I mean, that's that, and actually they do a lot of that at the county land bank. The county land bank will take over tax distressed properties. They become possession of the land bank, and the land bank turns them over to Habitat for Humanity. And then, you know, they have a mechanism to do that much greater than we do. But Gary, you have any comments on the legal aspects of that? Was I right, wrong?
Yeah, no, you nailed it, Dennis. In fact, I was chuckling a little bit because I think it was while you were gone at Chocolate that the city here had the exact same issue where we were changing out computers, wanted to donate them to some group, maybe it's the same group you were talking about, and found out we couldn't do that they had to go up for auction. And it's just one of those weird little rules. But Commissioner Bonzel, I think to address your question, the things you're talking about are in a city ordinance that says we can accept, as low as 80% of an appraised value. So one aspect to change that would be to change the ordinance. It's not a charter thing, which is a lot more difficult to change, but an ordinance change could probably do that. But then, as Dennis was just saying, you have to be very careful how that is done, because we can't just be perceived as giving things away. Kind of the prime directive cities and townships have is everything we do has to be for public purpose.
And
that
the important thing to remember on a lot of this is all the ordinances and laws we have are for a reason, right? Because somebody has done something. It's always the 10%er, right? It's the second cousin of the mayor pro tem at the time that wants to buy property or something, and they squeak it through on a deal, and the community's in an uproar, but they can't really do anything about it. And there's always a reason for it.
Right. And case in point, and this was actually a state Supreme Court decision, but municipalities can't buy a retiring employee a cake unless you invite the entire public to it. I mean, that's how ridiculous this has gotten. But like Dennis said, at some point, somewhere, somebody was probably abusing it, and that's why it went up to that level, because I can't imagine the state Supreme Court, that's a case they were really itching to take on. But those are the things we have to really be careful of. And if that's something you do want to change, Commissioner, and I know I don't have to tell you because I know you're a lot smarter than I am, but just keep all of that in mind, and we'll probably have to have the city attorney take a good hard look at what would be good to put in for wording for that kind of thing.
Well, thank you, Gary and Dennis, both of you, for that feedback. It's really helpful. And it's actually, I think we're certainly not the only ones that have this issue. I know that, there was a county land bank meeting a few months ago where they were trying to get the city of Negaunee to donate some lots to them. City of Negaunee wanted to, but they weren't able to because the city of Negaunee also has a policy like the one that we have. I think it's the exact same policy, actually. So something to look into for sure, but definitely a question for city legal counsel. So, but with that, I think we've got about 10 minutes left here before we're gonna have to end our meeting. So if our committee members have any other questions or suggestions from, for our city administrative team, now would be the time.
Just really appreciate them taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, I would echo that.
Thank you. Sorry for being late. Sorry about that.
No problem. I really, on behalf of all of the department heads, I really appreciate this opportunity. There are times where we don't get this opportunity ahead of time, and we really appreciate it because it makes our lives easier if we can be involved somewhat in advising you of what works and what doesn't. And we do appreciate being heard and being involved.
For sure. Well, and I want to echo, the other committee members that were thanking you all for taking time out of your busy days to be here. And please do know, you are actually being heard. I've got a couple pages of notes here. So this is going to be really helpful as we're crafting our final report in the next few months. So thank you. And I think with that, we'll bring our meeting to an end. And I guess the last item on our agenda here, do we get any correspondence or anything like that, Dennis or Sean?
No, I don't have anything.
Okay, great. Well, with that, we've reached the end of our agenda, and so we will adjourn at 9:21 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.